Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for our January Health Tug as an intro. Let's talk about our co-leads. I'm Mark Conley, one of our co-leads, but I'm joined today by Nicole and Simon. Lindsey will be joining us later, I believe, today. Our Twitter handles are there if you ever want to reach out to us outside of the meeting, but really excited to have everyone here today. I don't know, Simon and Nicole, if you just want to say a quick hello.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking time to join this meeting today. We're excited to have these great speakers with us.
Yeah, hey from British one of the group. Happy New Year to everyone. I think it's still just about all right to say that on the 14th of January. Yeah, looking forward to a great session and thanks to everyone for joining.
Awesome. So today, what do we have lined up? We have four great speakers, three great presentations. We have Simon and Chris who will be kicking us off talking about survey data, followed up by Sean, who's going to be reviewing an agile approach to their EMR analytics at Cerner. And then we'll wrap up with Jeff talking about analyzing downstream margin due to genetic counseling. And we'll let all of our great speakers today introduce themselves when they're presenting. So we'll have you waiting for that. Some community highlights before we get going. We have had a couple Viz of the days since we last met, highlighted here. The real world fake data Viz, an emergency room Viz that was highlighted, mindfulness as medicine, master of sleep, and then a period poverty dashboard. All four of these healthcare Viz of the days are available on Tableau Public. Definitely recommend folks reach out. If you hadn't seen these, hadn't had it pushed to your inbox, a lot of cool things in different areas of focus with our Viz of the days. I want to make sure I don't mess up the Prezi, keep things moving. Another big community highlight, Iron Viz. If you also didn't receive the push from Tableau, this is your reminder. Iron Viz is already back. It is open. There's one single global feeder. It's open now until February 7th, so a little under a month left. It's going to follow a similar format where there will be 3 finalists that make it there. And we're talking about $10,000 in prize money. So there is a financial benefit to it, but it's also a really great opportunity to kind of push your skills, try something different. I believe the theme for this is visualizing the arts. So something different than we've seen in terms of other feeders in the past in terms of the themes. Link here, but if you Google Iron Viz, I'm sure you can find a whole lot of information. There's a whole lot of inspiration out there for it. So just a reminder there for it. Really great opportunity there. And then the last thing, and you can tell we're moving quick because we have so much we want to get through today. Our next meeting, we're targeting March, April. The date's not set yet, but if you are interested in speaking, we're always looking for great speakers. I believe Nicole just dropped a link in the chat. You can either reach out to us directly or fill out that Google form. We'll look at that and we'll do outreach for folks that are interested in speaking. If you haven't presented before or you have, we're happy to have anybody and always looking for new topics and new speakers to bring to this group. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speakers, Simon and Chris. The one thing I will say as we get into the presentations, please use the Q&A feature when you have actual questions. Chat's great to say, yep, that looks awesome, and have a conversation there. But if you have questions for our speakers, we'll go through that. They will follow up with the questions not offline, but we won't be answering them live. We'll be kind of answering them via the Q&A section there. So Simon, you should be able to take that back. There you go, perfect.
Cheers, Mark. Can you see the slide deck?
Yep, looks good on my end.
Awesome. Welcome everyone to our Tableau Healthcare User Group presentation on surveys, fact or fiction. And we should probably have an asterisk there to say heavily influenced. The presentation will be heavily influenced by Steve Wexler because we've enjoyed working incredibly closely with him over recent months and years. But we hope this presentation will give you a fair bit of insights in terms of how to deal with survey data. Chris, do you want to give a quick introduction for yourself?
Yeah, sure. So good morning, everybody. I'm Chris Lay. I work with Simon within Jones Lang & Sell, JLL. And my role is really to help people use our dashboards within the business. So I'm business partnering director there on the account on which we work.
Thank you, Chris. I'm Simon Beaumont. Thank you, Mark, for the introductions already. I help lead the Virtual Healthcare User Group, Tableau Zen Master and Ambassador, and lead one of JLL's global BI teams.
Okay, so let's start. So let's begin by thinking about some basics on surveys. And first of all, what is a survey? And the dictionary definition of a survey is an examination of opinions, behavior, etc. And that examination is made by asking people questions. So surveys are everywhere in one form or another, and you'll see them everywhere you look these days. So we'll see something like 85% of people prefer brand A over brand B. Or candidate A in the election has 52% of the population's support. Perhaps in the banking environment, Bank A delivers the best customer service. Or something like 78% of building occupants are satisfied with the heating. And all of these things are surveys of one form or another. And people spend lots and lots of money on surveys and produce lots and lots of data and visually rich output from them. So the next slide is something like, this is a few years old now, but this was an American survey about travel satisfaction. Lots of pretty pictures there, but what does it actually mean? And what does it mean when you look into the underlying data behind that? And there's another one then about the fast food industry as well there, also in America. So let's now look at what do the results of a survey actually mean? So on this slide, there's a little chart there, and it's pretty simple. It's got the average number of decayed teeth per person in different countries against the amount of sugar. We all know sugar is bad for our teeth, so it's no surprise that that line is going up to the right as we go through that. But if you look at that and say something about it, so there's a statement there, 63% of American adults can correctly read that chart. That's true, that's what people are saying. But there's also further levels of data you could look at. So if you then narrow that down to people with a college degree, 79% can read that. So fortunately, it looks like going to college is a useful attribute to read some data charts. And if you go to a postgraduate, you get even better at it. So 84% are reading it correctly if you've got a postgrad degree. But if you've just gone to high school, only 50% of people. And all of those statements are true. And that really is beginning to illustrate what some of the downsides of a survey are. You can get a result, you can get a number, but unless you really understand where that data has come from and how that data has been asked to the participants within the survey, you can get different results and different interpretations of that survey or of the fact that you are trying to analyze. So there's more to think about with a survey than a simple question and answer. And what we now need to do is look at some of the things that we really need to think about when we are constructing surveys and running surveys. Now, one of the types of surveys, as we've indicated, is a satisfaction survey. And that's a question like, how satisfied are you with a particular service? Well, we need to think about that. And there's a good example there of a cartoon from a healthcare. There you are, wrong leg. Apart from that, would you describe yourself as completely satisfied? A good bit of comic thought there on a particular survey. But how has that result been measured? Is it measured from a single question? And is that question asked first? So does that lead the respondent to think about what other issues they may have encountered? Will that change the score? Are you going to report the average of several questions, or is it a single question? Or perhaps it could be a weighted average, and then perhaps some aspects are more important than others. So all of these things could be going on beneath the survey. And then you've got to think, how are you scoring that survey? What scoring are you going to use? You could use a scale like 1 to 5, good to bad. You could convert to something like a net promoter score, where perhaps 1 and 2 are promoters, 3 is neutral, and 4 and 5 are detractors. And then you can use the old favorite of surveys, which is the Likert scale, must pronounce that correctly, otherwise Steve will be after me, Likert, series of answers from one extreme to another, for example, extremely satisfied to extremely dissatisfied. And again, very often you will have a neutral in that. So several things you need to think about before you set up the particular survey, and even before you get any sort of answer coming out of it. They aren't as simple as they may seem on the surface. So now let's pass over to Simon, who will show us some things around this within Tableau.
So you'll be pleased to know this is going to be a combination of PowerPoint and Tableau as long as my PC works. So hopefully, Chris, can you just give me a thumbs up that you can see Tableau now? Right, cool. Please press the like button. So what we're going to do is we're going to intersplice all of the different sections of the PowerPoint with some examples in Tableau. I'm not going to build them because we're short on time, so we've already built them, but it's just to try and inspire you with some examples of how you can put into practice what Chris has just shared in terms of advice. So the first thing we're going to look at is how to analyze Net Promoter Score. So traditionally, what you might see is Net Promoter Score converted into a score. So this is, you've got a Net Promoter Score of 8 out of 10 on the title and out of 119,000 respondents. And then you get the score out of 100 throughout each of the different products. But that hides, quite often, and we all know this in healthcare, people are what provide surveys and people are who we treat. So you don't really want to average, you really need to understand the grain, because before you average the two extremes and come to somewhere in the middle. So what we'd start to encourage you to do is start to move away from an average and look at your individual detractors and promoters, so that you can see here that all of a sudden, that instead of looking at an average score, we're now looking at the percentage of promoters and detractors in each of the segments from 1 to 10. But you've got the neutrals in the middle there, which I would suggest are quite difficult to allow you to compare the blue promoters and the orange detractors. So one of the things that we would suggest to do is then to group your detractors and promoters into a single consolidated bar and make those diverging from the center point. So your negatives, your detractors are the negative aspect on one side and the promoters are the positive aspect on the other. And then move your neutrals out to the right-hand side. Because by separating the neutrals, it's still critically important you know them, but you don't want them in the middle chart to be able, or the main chart, because for me it detracts from your ability to compare your promoters and detractors. And then we'd encourage you to go one step further. So actually it's great knowing the detractors, great knowing the promoters, it's great knowing the neutrals, but we would always say context is king. So it's also critical to know the size of the survey sample or the size of the respondent pool that you are looking at within each one of these dimensions. So you can see here, for instance, that the top product, which is potentially your highest net promoter, is actually your smallest sample size. And we will start to get on later in the talk, and Chris will share some concepts of margin of error and sample size to allow you to say, is that significant? But we would strongly suggest always put alongside it your respondents to be able to understand that. And then taking that one step further, because what you've got here is the ability to see detractors and promoters, what we'd encourage potentially is then also to overlay the net promoter score on top of your promoters and detractors, and then you can start to understand, well, if so many of our products are a high net promoter score above 20, why is it our average score is only 8? Well, that's because your highest volume of respondents with 41,000 respondents has got a net promoter score of 3. So it's just really useful to layer in those insights at every step so that you're guiding your end user through the insights as opposed to averaging and risking losing that granular detail and the ability to get the right insights. Chris, again, if you can just thumbs up when you can see PowerPoint. Fantastic. And then you've also got different types of questions. So not all surveys will be in a net promoter style. Sometimes you simply get a single answer. Give me a demographic, give me an age. Sometimes you get multiple choices. So how many times have you used the surveys? And then sometimes you get rating scales. So tell me good, very good, poor, very poor. So again, there are different ways you can analyze that. So when going into multiple choices, we would encourage you to be able to look at, and this is just us using some dummy data from JLL, the ability to split down the questions and to be able to look at each individual respondent. But if you speak to any advanced data visualization person, they will often say keep it simple. And you will notice that on here, it is nothing more significant than a bar chart. And that's deliberately so because you want the people to focus on the insights, not necessarily on understanding a radar chart or anything like that. Keep it simple. Show the questions and the responses as individual rows, and it will allow people to focus on the insights as opposed to worrying about the chart type. But the downside of having the bars as an individual row is it can take up a lot of real estate. So what you can potentially do is pivot the data to show the responses as individual columns and then the row as an individual question. And what that has allowed you to do is use your real estate far more effectively because you can then have multiple bars across singular ways. Now, realistically, if you want to do that in Tableau, you probably have to start doing it as separate sheets or using indexes, but it is possible to do, and it will give you far more ability to vary your page layout than it would do simply as a single row. And then the other way of doing it, if you wanted to do, is to show each of the individual responses as a coloured dot, which is perfectly acceptable. All I would caution you of is the more responses and the more different types of answers you get, the more colours you need, and the more colours you need, the more difficult it will be for your end user to be able to interpret those results. So all three of those examples are potential examples, but just be careful of which one you choose and try and keep it as simple as possible for your end user.
Thanks, Simon. So back to me now. So let's just continue to think a little bit about some of the survey questions. And the question here is the order of the questions. Can the order of questions influence the outcome? And the answer is absolutely yes. And if I'd had a bit more time, I'd have played you a little comedy clip from a British TV program where somebody is asking somebody a series of questions. They ask them in one way and they get to a particular conclusion. They then ask a very similar set of questions, but in a slightly different way, and they will get to a completely different conclusion. So when you ask a question and how you phrase the question can certainly influence the response that you're going to get from your respondents. Now, the next thing about a survey is that a survey is a way of finding out what people think about something. But we can't ask everybody. If you imagine this scenario here where there's, I don't know how many people there are in this picture, but thousands, you can't ask everybody there as to what they think about something. So a survey takes the results of a few people, and then you hope that those people present, or the people you've asked, represent the views of everybody. But in fact, does it? And partly that's going to depend on who we ask, how many. Is it a balanced cross-section? Have you chosen the sample correctly? And if you look at different or small group sizes, that may also distort comparisons and insights. So we can begin to think about some bias in surveys, and there are several different sources of bias in surveys. Sampling bias. Are you asking the right people? If you ask people if they love dogs or something, and you've actually gone to a cat appreciation society, you may get the wrong answer coming through from that. It's also important to look at who doesn't respond to the survey. Sometimes when we get some sort of satisfaction surveys, as I say, they are everywhere at the moment. Everything you buy or do, somebody wants to be told how wonderful they are. A lot of people don't reply. Those that do reply, maybe those who've had a very negative experience or perhaps a very positive experience. So why are people not replying? And response people, are they, similar response bias rather, are they giving you the accurate answer, or are they actually trying to make a point because they've got an axe to grind? And as we discussed a few moments ago, there's also the question order bias. So all of these things we can term and group together as a term of bias in surveys. And bias will affect the output that you're going to get and the interpretation of those results. So let's move on now a little bit and think about the interpretation and visualization of surveys. And Nate Silver is somebody that's well known, and he says that the numbers have no way of speaking for themselves. We speak for them. We imbue them with meaning. And within a survey, we want to demonstrate some sort of trust when we are presenting and interpreting those results. And it's sometimes important to admit that perhaps we don't know. There could be a range about a number. And what people love to do is take a single number out of a survey and then use that to make a point. But we sometimes, as data analysts and as specialist surveys, need to acknowledge that there is a limited set of data on which we've based that particular result. So it may not be possible to give an absolute number. And why is that? Well, it's something called margin of error. And margin of error comes about because we simply do not ask everybody what they think. We are only asking some people. And as we say, we are hoping that what their views are represents everybody. Unfortunately, statistics can help us and gives us a formula for this uncertainty. I'm not going to go into the maths of this too much today, but there's a formula there for margin of error, where Z is the confidence value, P is the sample proportion, so 75% or 0.75, and N is the sample size, so maybe 1,000 or 100 or whatever it is. And if you plug those things in, you will get a measure of the uncertainty in a survey result. And typically, when we are looking at surveys, we use something called a confidence level. And we are saying that the survey result is something plus or minus something at this level of confidence. And that's saying we are 95% sure, or 95 times out of 100, that the true result would be within that band of results if we've been able to ask everybody. And typically, people are using 95% confidence, which in that formula we just had is a 1.96 factor at the beginning of that formula. Sometimes we'll use a lower level of confidence, say 90%. And the number of people you ask obviously impacts this. And this is a graph showing you how the margin of error varies with the sample size. So when you get down to a very small sample size, down at the bottom left there of that x-axis, the margin of error begins to rocket upwards. And it's the implication of a square root relationship. To cut the margin of error in half, you need 4 times as many respondents. And most surveys will try to use around about 1,000 respondents, and that will give you something like plus or minus 3% as the margin of error on that particular result. And the 1,000 is actually quite a big survey. You'll be surprised how many surveys out there have got fewer than 1,000 respondents. So the implication of the margin of error is that surveys are not an exact science. Much as many people in the corporate space want to latch on to an exact number, surveys don't give them that exact number. And many people forget to report the margin of error or use some vague statement, or probably don't understand it, and perhaps they don't even want to mention it. But it's vital that us as analysts consider the margin of error when comparing different results and different surveys. And also, people may think naively, oh, I'll ask 2,000 people instead of 1,000. That'll be quite a big overhead in terms of administering that survey, but actually the gains in the statistics will be very small in going from 1,000 to 2,000. And as I showed you on that little chart just now, as well, at small sample sizes, the margin of error becomes very significant. Even asking 100 people, you'll have approximately plus or minus 10%. So when you see something that says based on the survey of 100 people or 150 people, just bear in mind the margin of error is going to be quite high, and you need to take that result with a pinch of salt. So now Simon's going to take us back into some Tableau views and about showing how we can visualize the margin of error within survey data.
So we're just going to, you need to be aware some of this will use table calcs to be able to do it. So to be able to achieve this, you need to be able to use some advanced Tableau. But you will see here the circle is looking at the percentage in terms of percentage positive, and the bar represents the possible range of results based on a 95% confidence interval. So you're still giving people the clarity of what's the score, but you are visualizing what's the potential range. And in JLL, we think that is critical to empowering our people to understand the validity of their results. So you can do it as a line. You can do it exactly the same way, but just make it into a fatter line, which converts it into a bar. Again, both absolutely appropriate and both can absolutely give you the clarity. But the other thing we would suggest you do is also visualize when you get small response in small sample sizes of respondents. And the way that we do that is simply to highlight a red circle when we have got less than 100 respondents. So again, it's not rocket science, it's simply a visual prompt to be able to say to people, hey, be aware these results may not be as reliable as you think they are. And then you would also want to do that on trend lines. So if you have a trend line, it's very easy to say, how does one value compare to the next, and say, hey, it's gone up by 12%. But you can use margin of error to test, does your increase or decrease exceed your upper or lower control limits based on statistical significance? And if that does, we would encourage you simply to highlight that point to say, hey, be aware, this trend is the one, or this difference is the one you want to focus on because it's changed significantly. So again, just simple visual prompts to be able to analyze that.
Okay, so margin of error is important in how to interpret surveys. But as I said a few moments ago, very few people ever quote that margin of error. And even respected polling organizations for the public domain, they probably don't quote it. This is a survey I found it on the BBC website, but it came from Reuters. So it's come from respected sources, and it's about the recent US election. And it says use, or helpfully perhaps at the bottom, or perhaps not, all figures have a margin of error which is wider for smaller subgroups. Great, so it's recognizing that there is a margin of error, but it's not telling us how we can use that on here. We don't know whether these groups were all the same size. We don't know whether there were fewer people 65 or over, or fewer younger people. We have no idea. So when we are looking at the difference between, say, the 30 to 44 and the 45 to 64 age groups, are there any differences there? Well, the numbers are the same, so possibly not. But what's the margin of error on each of those? And, you know, we say that there are fewer older people there, maybe it's just 500. And an error of plus or minus 4% would be enough to change the interpretation of how that particular chart is read. So a bit of a strange visual here, fish and chips, but we have confidence to quote your, have confidence to quote your confidence level. And a survey result should always be accompanied by its confidence level. And they go together. You can't have one without the other. Fish and chips is one of our national dishes, and you can't have fish without chips. So maybe we should just talk about a range and not quote a number. Maybe we should say something like the survey result is 52 to 56%, rather than saying it's 54%. Now, the next thing about surveys is very often when you give a survey result, you can also leave some sort of comment about why you've given a particular score. And once we've done all the nice visuals and all the significance and everything like that, it's also very good now to look at the verbatim feedback that people have given you, because that can now add some nuance into why they've scored something. So these are potentially a rich source of information. But we all know, don't we, when we give a survey and we write something down, do you ever wonder whether anybody actually reads them or not? And how many times have you written a comment? Sometimes I test surveys like this. I put a real rubbish comment in and I wait to see if anybody gets back to me. Do they ever? No. I never hear back on any survey I've written, even if I've been really, really bad about something or really, really positive about something. And that's because, you know, it's a hard job to read possibly thousands of comments. So we need to find a different way to be able to interpret it. So can visualization help with this? Well, yes, it can. And a typical way to do this is to use something like a word cloud. We've all seen these, but and we make the most popular words bigger so they kind of stand out. But is that effective? And what do you do with it? And how does it help with your insights? So what we'd like to do now is talk through a few different ways in which we can visualize some text data to gain more insights from them. So back over to Simon.
Thanks, Chris. So yes, you can do a word cloud, but we would strongly suggest that as of limited value. It might be attractive for your end user, but let's face it, for anyone that's used Excel, if you ask an Excel user what chart type they want, they're likely to say a pie chart and a pivot table because that's what they're used to. Just because people might be used to seeing word clouds doesn't mean they're right. And I would strongly recommend a word cloud bubble is not much better. So what we would actually encourage you to do is start to look at sentiment. So if we jump back into Tableau, back into the deck, you can then use advanced analytics to look at sentiment. So you can run text data through Microsoft Azure Cognitive Services and other platforms out there to be able to identify the potential sentiment in terms of the level of positivity or negativity relating to an answer. You can also translate comments, so from Chinese to English, and it makes that data far more accessible. So create sentiment analysis and use it to translate something that potentially is quite complex to read into something that is all of a sudden quantitative and can be analysed. But give a warning in a comment. So if you detect that the sentiment analysis is significant, make sure that you allow people to see it. I'm sorry, I didn't want to do that. Chris, do you want to quickly give the example?
Yeah, we've got a great story about how we've been able to use actually translation of comments. We working within an international business, and some of our surveys are coming back in local Chinese text. So we had no way of reading these comments. We had to rely on our local teams to do that. And in the survey, we had questions about opinions of the restrooms. And this survey had been running for about 6 years. Once we introduced the ability to do the translation, we started to see statements like, we don't have a lounge. And we started to scratch our head a little bit. But when the survey questions were originally translated to the local language for asking the survey, somebody picked up the wrong word. Because in Chinese, there are different words for something like a lounge or a restroom or a toilet, and they picked up the wrong translation. So people had been answering this survey for 6 years based on lounges rather than restrooms, washrooms, toilets, whatever you want to call them. And when the word was corrected, we actually saw a drop in the scores of about 10%. So we actually then began to get a different level of insight into this particular survey. So it was an interesting one there where something was going on unbeknown to us. And it was only once we introduced these translation ability through cognitive services that we were able to unearth that and then really get to the true insight. So just an interesting little story there.
And we would encourage you, if you ever want to analyse the sentiment, this was courtesy of Hesham Issa, who Hesham won at IronViz a few years ago, and I had the pleasure of working with him. We've called it a heart chart. So it combines the score with the sentiment. So the coloured heart tells the reader the element in terms of the sentiment, and the background circle gives you the quantifiable colour relating to the response. So you can all of a sudden combine the two in a very visual way. And it also helps warning shots. So if the colours are different and you've got the sentiment being negative but the response being positive or neutral, it suggests there may be future warnings that if you don't act on the sentiment, that will soon become negative. And we would also encourage you to talk about keyword searches. So helping people find key items in a survey in terms of grouping comments. So if you know that there are key things like a waiting room or like patient services, like waiting times, group up those wordings so that then you can see the comments and the sentiment relating to those keywords. It's going to be far easier to identify those nuggets of information as opposed to asking everyone to search through thousands of comments. And just for the sake of time, I'm just going to skip over that part of the demo just so we can show you the overall dashboard for 2 minutes before we finish right at the very end. So Chris, do you want to just wrap up in terms of the words?
Yeah, sure. So whilst we can do things with the text analysis and what have you, it's not perfect. It's not going to give us everything. And sometimes, you know, there is no substitute, but just to sit there and read through some of the comments. The visualization can help you, but they won't necessarily give you everything that you need. But please, whenever you do a survey and you do see some comments or whatever, please do act on them because your respondents will appreciate it. And if you've got anybody like me around who's testing you to see whether you're going to see it, I'd be really appreciative if somebody actually got back to me on some of the surveys I have filled in. So do take the time to act on them. It will increase your response rate on future surveys by a little thank you back to people. So now we're going to give you a demo of our sanitized version of an overall dashboard where we brought together lots of these elements from a large survey that we run.
So this will be a little bit of a quick teaser because I'm aware we're tight on time and I want to be able to make sure that the other speakers have their relevant time. So we're just going to quickly whiz through. First off, we look at the overall satisfaction and we split it by region and country. So this is a geography split. You will notice that we are showing the bars next to the circle to be able to give the margin of error. And you will notice on the trend lines, we also give the coloured dot to say when something is significant. And you will notice next to the up and down arrows, we also colour the arrows to say if it's a significant trend and the red warning to say the response is low. And then just as a helpful hint to the left-hand side, you've also got little prompts for the I button to be able to hover over it and guide your user through how to understand the results. But then you might want to move away from geographical and be able to analyse for a specific region or country and split it by each individual question. And this is where you can see the questions, and we've just sanitized the questions by stripping out the text. You can again see the range of potentials by each individual question, but we've used some specific prompts here. So you could click on the alarm bell to see the 3 countries that have responded with significant decreases and what questions they are. Likewise, you can click on the significant increases and see the countries that got significant increases. But you can also click on an individual question and then use the toggle button using collapsible containers to be able to see the individual questions for a country or a region. So it's a really nice way of saying, hey, you've got a lot of information to show here. You don't need to show it all at once. You can make it digestible by having interaction in your dashboard to collapse sections and allow people to drill it down. And then the very last one just to finish with is we'll give you the analysis of the verbatim comments. So how many comments we've got, what's the sentiment of your satisfactory comments, your sentiment of your unsatisfactory comments, and you'll start to come down here to see that's where you've got the heart chart to say the sentiment is what the heart feels, the circle is what the response feels, so do they match, and to really give you insights when it comes to your data. So I appreciate it as a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully it will just inspire you as a real-life example. That is our dashboard that we present to our clients in JLL sanitised so we could present it to you today. And that, in a whistle-stop tour, is how we do surveys, and hopefully you will now understand, is it fact or fiction? It's fact, but not quite. So as with anything, there's always a but. Just be aware of the significance, be aware of the intricacies of what you're showing, and always consider what you need to give to your audience to be aware of those uncertainties. So on behalf of Chris and I, thank you for listening, and we hope you've enjoyed it. If you did want to reach out to us, there are our email addresses and my Twitter handle. You're more than welcome to get in touch, and we're more than happy to answer any questions if you did so. But Nicole, Mark, thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chris and Simon. That was truly amazing. Your dashboards are beautiful, and I'm thankful for the reminder of the sample size when dealing with surveys results. I'm going to turn it over to Lindsey.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome on this Friday. So next up, we have Sean Miller. Sean is a Tableau ambassador. He's the lead BI developer at Cerner, which is a very large supplier of health information technology services, devices, and supplies. Or hardware, and he supports leading the Analytics Center of Excellence at Cerner and provides training and supports internal analysts and clients heavily involved in the Tableau community. And you know, we've had him on before, brilliant speaker, and I'm sure he'll have some pretty cool things to share. So take it away, Sean.
All right, thanks, Lindsay. Appreciate that introduction. Hello, everybody. Thanks for taking the time out of your Friday to join us for this. I'm really excited about this. So yeah, like Lindsay said, I work at Cerner, and we are one of the world's largest healthcare IT companies, and we provide EMR, EHR services and software products for our clients. And over the past, I mean, we've grown that business for over 40 years, and we're just now kind of coming into kind of modernizing the analytics for our EHR, and that's kind of what this presentation and what I've been working on for the past 6 to 8 months is all about. So, we're going to cover over some of the introduction, talk about Cerner, talk about what we do, talk about some of the infrastructure stuff, talk about the kind of what the problems are, what the pain points are, and then kind of what we've agreed to go tackle and go do. And then we'll dive into our Agile process for going about finishing that work. I'm going to provide you with again, very quick, high level kind of examples of what we've done, of what we've created for some of our service lines. And then lastly, we'll finish up with some takeaways and some lessons learned. So if you are in the business of, or if you're kind of thinking about your 2022 planning in your healthcare organizations, if you're thinking about kind of modernizing or switching over some of your reporting to kind of more modern analytics, this is definitely going to be a great presentation to tune into. So first, quick introduction about me. I'm a lead BI developer, as Lindsay said, here at Cerner. I've been here 8 years. I've been in Tableau for 7 of those, so I've been doing Tableau for quite a while. I'm a Tableau desktop certified professional, and I'm a social ambassador, and you can find me all over everywhere at Hipster Viz Ninja. So really excited to be here today. So work at Cerner. If you're not familiar with us, we're 40 plus years in healthcare IT. We've got 26,000 worldwide associates. We've got another really big number that we're really proud of is that 650,000 physician users and over 2.2 million non-physician users. So we have a lot of people using our systems, using our EHR, and 4,000 hospitals and 6,000 physician practices. So we've got a lot of data, and everybody does their things differently. And so if you just kind of wrap your mind around those numbers and kind of think about how we kind of think about and come up with a process for thinking about, how are we going to kind of sunset some legacy reports and modernize those in modern BI tools. It's been a pretty fun and challenging undertaking. So that's kind of what we're talking about. So some of the market trends when it comes to when we start to think about what's happening in the market in regards to analytics. Everybody's moving to the cloud, and so are we. People are offloading a lot of their data out of data centers and putting them up in the cloud. And there's many different vendors. Another thing that we really want to key in on is the data latency reductions. So making sure that we have the data that's needed at the time that it's needed. And then also, the big one that this is kind of geared towards is the deprecation of legacy tools, right? So these could be outdated legacy reporting tools, could be homegrown legacy reporting tools that they just, because of the volume, velocity, and variety of data, they're just not able to meet the clients where they are. So that's why we've kind of adopted this mass migration to an advanced analytics versus traditional reporting. So that's kind of what we're doing here. So, thinking specifically about our clients and what they need, just kind of what the current state of it is, in leading up to when we started this, again, about 6 to 8 months ago. Generally, Cerner EMR, Cerner EHR, we had, anywhere up to 3 different reporting options for clients to use, which is very cumbersome and a lot of overkill and overhead. And, think about, if you're an analyst and, you have to go, if somebody comes to you and says, I need to go analyze this metric, you've got to go figure out where that metric lives and then figure out which of the 3 different reporting tools do I need to go find that metric and hope that they match, right? But, on top of that, we've got those tools that we were then asking our clients to use they're antiquated, they're unwieldy, duplicative. It just didn't make sense. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to transfer all that. What we're doing is we're crawling all of our Millennium, which is the Cerner EHR foundation. We're going to migrate. We're going to crawl. We're not migrating. We're crawling that into our Healthy Intent and Healthy Analytics enterprise data warehouse for all of our clients. And with that, so our Healthy Intent sits on top of Vertica, which is our analytic database for that. And then we've built homegrown tools to be able to create custom tables within their database, how to create Tableau data models, SAP business objects universes, all through the web, right? So there's no, we control the access through user logins, and through the web, they're able to write SQL, create tables, create data sources, create workbooks. That's what clients are going to be able to do and are starting to do over the last 6 to 8 months. So, and again, speaking about that data latency, we're getting it down to where it used to be, several hours, almost, up to 12 to 18 hours. We're getting that data latency down into the minutes. So we're doing some really incredible work getting the data near real time. So we're really excited about some of that. So thinking about what the problems were and what we're going to go do, this kind of unified analytics and reporting is kind of the name for it. That we kind of came up with. So if you can imagine, you think about that foundation, again, there are over 2,000 Millennium EHR tables that sit under all of our solutions. And there are any number of ways, good and bad, to join those together to answer your analytic questions. So what we're doing, what we've made the decision to do, is we're going to do a lot of that pre-joining of all of those 2,000 tables for clients. So, you might, if you need to go analyze encounters, for example, emergency encounters, anytime you wanted to do that, you have to join to the encounter table and the person table and all these different tables every single time you wanted to analyze something. And it just didn't make sense. And we wanted to make sure it was a consistent process. So that's why we kind of kept up with this kind of what we're calling common data sets, if you will, kind of an internal term. But basically what it is, it's for clients to go in, and if you use, if you do a select star from this common data set encounter table, what you're going to get is a standard table of all of your encounters and all of the data that you need. And you don't need to do any other joins. So we're bringing it all together and giving a nice, simple, easy solution for our clients. And then, this, I mentioned encounters, I mentioned emergency, the emergency room. We're going to build out. I think there's somewhere over like 2,000 legacy reports that we're going to be retiring over the next, over the next 24 months or 12 months, I should say, across a bunch of different service lines, right? So, you can see those, ambulatory, rev cycle, emergency, radiology, lab, all those types of things. We're going to be doing those things. So we're really excited about it. And then, so we're not just going to be retiring the legacy reports with new reports, but we're also going to give our clients access to all of the tools available to them. So they're going to be able to write those custom ad hoc tables and create Tableau workbooks and create business objects reports for that. So we're really excited. Clients are really excited about it, and it's been a fun journey over the last 6 to 8 months. So how did we go about doing that? So everything up to this point, I feel like, has been a little salesy. So thanks for bearing through that with me. But now it's like, okay, so we've got this process. We've stated the problem. We know what we're going to go do. How are we going to go do it? Well, you got to put together a dream team, right? That's not to say anything bad about all the other teams that work for us, but this is a pretty major project. So we've got our best and brightest. We've got 2 analytic directors. One of those directors is our Scrum Master. So like I said, we're doing an Agile approach. So we're doing traditional Agile, terminology and milestones and 2-week sprints, all that. So one of those directors, on top of all of the other stuff he does, is also our Scrum Master and kind of keeps us all in line and doing what we need to be doing. And then we got 1 product owner. So we just hired another product owner to kind of help lighten the load for him. But it's been pretty incredible for him. The product owner, if you're not just kind of, level set, kind of understand product owners, they're the liaisons between the legacy team and our team. So they have the discussions, coordinate what needs to happen, figure out, the needs, and so that the individual teams can still keep their heads down and get the work done. And the product owner kind of goes between those two. So really, really thankful for all his work. So, and then we've got 2 lead data platform architects. These are the people that are figuring out how to do all those common data sets. How are we going to join all these tables together? How are we going to do it efficiently and effectively, so that when we go to create these analytics, not only is it giving us the right metrics, but it's also performant, all those types of things. So really thankful for those guys. And then we've got me and 4 other BI developers on the team who are going and actually creating all of the content. And whenever I say content, there's multiple different pieces that go across that, right? So there's a use case specific data set that comes with that. So when I say data set, I mean a table. So we might go to the encounter table and we join to the person table and all those kinds of different tables and bring them together for specific to the use case that we're building a piece of content for. Then from there, we're building out a Tableau data set or a Tableau TDS or a business object universe. And then we're actually creating the Tableau workbook and dashboards. So that's what we've been doing, which is pretty cool. So now that we've got the team, now we got to think about the Agile approach, right? And so these are all of the different components that we have to kind of keep in mind as we kind of go about this project, right? So we're thinking about, the analytics, right? So not only, one of the big things that we set out and thought about from the day we started is we have to get to parity, right? We cannot put out a new report if it doesn't have everything that a legacy report has. So making sure that metrics match, making sure that use cases and questions and key functionality are answered and have the same numbers, right? So thinking about all those types of things. If there's any other low-hanging fruit, we're gonna tackle it. But again, the Agile approach in this helps keep us focused. If we're gonna go create this dashboard, and here are the requirements for that dashboard, and that is what we are going to go create. If there's low-hanging fruit, we'll see. We'll analyze that and see if it needs to be a separate JIRA, and if it can wait, or if it needs to be in the MVP release. Thinking about technology, we have two different sets of tools. We've got Tableau and we've got SAP Business Objects. We've got two tools because there are different use cases, right? We know that Tableau is really, really great at aggregating and analyzing interactive dashboards. We also know that it's not so great at building crosstabs of, several 100,000 rows, which sometimes you need. And so that's why using the right tool for the right use cases is very, very important to us. So that's what we think about whenever we think about that technology. And then the other thing that I want to make sure that I touch on is the user experience and the training aspects, right? We're sunsetting a lot of legacy reports, and we're giving clients new modern BI analytic tools. And we are very aware and conscious of this is going to be a shock to the system for them, for a lot of our clients that have been around and been Cerner clients for a long time. They've got systems and processes in place to do all of those things. And then we're going to take those away and give them this brand new thing that they probably don't have any experience in. So how are we going to go about tackling training and supporting our clients and making sure that they can use this new functionality as to the best of their abilities? So we're creating demo training videos for each of our dashboards. We're documenting everything like crazy. We're thinking about the workflow of when we have a use case and we have a key question that we want to get answered. We're thinking about the workflow that the analyst is going to have to go through in order to get to that question, and then put that into the dashboard for them so that it makes it as streamlined as possible for them. So those are all the things that we've been doing. That's our Agile approach. And so what I'd like to do now is kind of take you through a handful of some of the content that we've created and just kind of talk through some of the legacy reports that we kind of retired over the last 6 to 8 months. So this first dashboard here is, so like I said, so the first main 3 service lines that we tackled in 21 were surgery, oncology, and emergency medicine. Those were the three main service lines that we tackled last year. And so these are just a sample of some of those dashboards that we created. And so, so when we talk about surgery case times, right, we talk about kind of the throughput of a surgery case. These are the types of analytics that our clients didn't have access to, or if they did, they were in separate reports, in separate tools. And so you can imagine the amount of time it took to kind of bring all that together to be able to create something like this. But because we're able to crawl this into our analytic database, create common data sets, create workbooks on top of this, we can finally give clients a full picture of their perioperative department. So again, you can see, by procedure, the number of cases, and then you can see the time it took from the time the patient arrived in pre-op all the way through the PACU. And so having this level of detail, you can start to really see, where are your bottlenecks, right? And how do we kind of get through, figuring, are there key trends, things that we need to think about when it comes to the process of a surgery case at a particular client. I mentioned emergency medicine. This was an interesting project. This is our NEDOCs. So NEDOC is an industry standard index score that's calculated based on an industry standard formula. And it basically measures the level of busyness within your emergency department. Within each hour, within each day, clients can configure how often they want this job to run, up to 4 times an hour. And then we just give them kind of an idea of, what that looks like at a high level. So you can see here, we've got, it looks like Tuesday afternoons are really, really heavy at this particular client. And if you really wanted to dig into the details, with Tableau and all that kind of thing, we can provide interactivity to kind of see the different highlights in here. And then with interactivity, if you wanted to analyze what Tuesday looks like and how we got to those numbers, through menu actions and interactivity, you can actually get down to, for August 5th, for each hour, here's the score from the previous dashboard. But then here are the supporting facts. Here are the numbers that went into that standard formula to give you, to come up with that score. So that composite score. So this was a really fun, and honestly, this is right here. This view was the legacy report. This was all that the clients had access to originally. But now, with the power of Tableau and our platform, we're able to give them something like this so they can see kind of their key trends and stuff like that. Another one that we walked through, again, thinking about surgery case times with their throughputs. We did the exact same thing with ED, but we put a little bit different spin on it. So these are all the different throughput times for your, in the emergency department. So the door to triage times, all the way through door to depart, right? As Tableau likes to refresh on me. But you can kind of get an idea of what that looks like. And clients can come in here and they can set their own targets. So that was another thing that we kind of had to think about is how are we going to make this as fluid as possible? When we deploy these out to, several hundred clients at a time, we have no idea of knowing what their specific targets are going to be. So by using, parameter values, they'll be able to set their own targets, and then this dashboard will flex accordingly. So, and we've got those processes in place to allow for those custom values or custom targets all the way throughout the analytic process. So all the way down to data sets and code values and CKI values and CDF values, because clients can kind of configure that however they want within our system. So we had to come up with and think about a process for how to go about doing that. Another big thing that clients want to know about is who is using the emergency department as their primary care location. So we created this frequent visits dashboard that shows, you can see, by hovering on a person, you can see a running total trend of their visits. So you can see this person, this patient right here, constantly uses the ED a lot, 45 visits over the last 2 years. And you can see, again, by clicking on a patient, it'll filter down. You can see what they were actually diagnosed with, and then these KPIs, right? I mean, to be able to finally show face up that out of 61,000, 3,100 came back within 72 hours, and of those 3,100 that came back within 72 hours. 18 of them were diagnosed for the same thing they were discharged with, right? So giving that level of detail is really cool. So another thing that we did in conjunction with kind of doing parity with these legacy reports, it also gave us the opportunity to go build out net new dashboards, net new use cases. So this one right here is our St. John's Sepsis monitoring discovery dashboard. So you can see high level how many sepsis alerts you have within your organization and kind of what they mean, drill into patient detail in any of those, but just kind of get an idea if you're having, what your St. John's Sepsis monitoring is looking like. And then lastly, we really wanted to give, kind of thinking net new, we really wanted to give people this kind of overarching patient discovery, right? Is what we're calling it. And it's kind of who's using our system. And when I mean system, I mean everything. So you can go out. So regardless of encounter type, right? So if you want to look at all of your different encounter types all together in one place, this is where you're going to be able to do that. And you can see kind of a long-term trend. Also, so it gets, high level, just encounter level. But we've also got looking at what's the health status of our population. You can see that, 20% of our population of people have hypertension. 8% have asthma. So looking at these top 25 chronic conditions, and then you can see a histogram of, the problems per patient, chronic conditions per patient. So this has been a really nice one that people have really started to take off on. So that was just a small sampling of some of the things that we've been working on over the past 6 to 8 months. And so obviously the question, what have clients, what's been the initial response to this? Well, we're really pleased to report that it's been overwhelmingly positive. Everyone is really pleased and excited with the direction that we've taken and moving towards in regards to reporting and analytics. And they are really excited to be able to get their hands on the data and dig into the data and find their own stories and insights. And then one thing that they're really, it's one of those things that everybody grumbles at doing. It's nobody's favorite thing, but the value of it is you can't put a value on the level of it. Is the level of documentation that we've consciously been taking with this. So we are documenting everything at every step in the process. So I talked about those common data sets. We're documenting those common data sets, and we're linking it back to the original source mapping into the tables that are in the Millennium database. from the common data set, we're creating those, those sometimes aggregate use case data sets. We're documenting, very clearly what each column represents, common values, those types of things. We're also documenting any Tableau creation that we do. So we're documenting what a calculated field in Tableau is, how to what the actual SQL is behind it, so that clients could actually go validate and make sure that if they wanted to use that calculation in a different use case, they could kind of take that and kind of copy and paste it into what they're doing. And so clients have really taken to that, and they're really thankful for that. And like I said, it's nobody's favorite part, right? Nobody wants to tell a BI developer, okay, now it's time to go document your dashboard. Nobody likes doing that, but the value of it is really high. So, which is really nice. Some of the lessons learned is we have learned so much about APIs because we've onboarded over 200 clients over the past 6 to 8 months. So whenever I create a new piece of content, the data set, which is the table in Vertica, the Tableau TDS, and the Tableau workbook are all being deployed out via APIs, both Tableau were applicable, and then through our own homegrown APIs. So we're to all 250 clients and growing, right? So we've learned a lot about that. We've learned the value of having a formal development process and sticking to it. And the Agile process, I can tell you from experiences, has been very key to our success. It's really easy to get bogged down and, oh, well, I can just add this. I can just add this to this dashboard, but it's never really that simple. We always think it's that simple, but then when you start doing it, it's like, oh, well, I just took up a whole day trying to do that. And so actually, creating a JIRA process. So we use JIRA. So, thinking about, epics and stories and tasks and subtasks and, backlog grooming and all those different milestones have really helped keep us focused and efficient in what we create and get things out the door. And lastly, the value of documentation can't be stressed enough. So, so that's that was a quick run through of what we've done. And I hope this was inspiring to you to kind of go think about different ways of doing things, get a process. I'm happy to discuss further on different channels if we need to. But with that, go forth and viz.
Thanks so much, Sean. Always very inspiring and interesting information you can provide. There was a lot of great comments in the chat, so be sure to check in there. We have a couple questions. I'm gonna leave them in the Q&A for you, cool. Particularly a Cerner user hospital person who was on this call is really excited to hear when these are going to roll out. So I think he's here, but she's very excited, so be sure to answer that one.
I will, absolutely.
But thank you.
You bet.
So with that, we're going to transition to our third presentation. We have Jeff Kritzman, who is a business intelligence architect at the University of Iowa Healthcare. And I'm not going to do too much more of an intro, Jeff. I'll leave that to you, but feel free to take it away. And just as a reminder, as Jeff's going, if you have questions, please use the Q&A. Depending on how much time we have at the end, if we have a buffer, we might have you answer those live, Jeff, just so it's not like we immediately drop off and can't close the loop for people. But we'll kind of play it by your own timing for that note. But feel free to take it away.
Thanks. All right, can you all see my screen there?
Yep, looks good.
Great. All right, so hi, my name is Jeff Kritzman, and yeah, I'm a business intelligence architect with the University of Iowa Healthcare, or UIHC. And today I'd like to share a project I've been working on with our genetic counseling group. First, let me tell you a bit about UIHC. So we're the only tertiary care hospital in Iowa, as well as the only comprehensive academic medical center in Iowa. So we get a lot of really sick patients from throughout the whole state, as well as from neighboring states. Our main hospital is 860 beds, and including a dedicated children's hospital is 190 beds. And we have about 200 clinics and outreach centers throughout the state. And yeah, so here in this picture, we've got the wave. And so if you're not familiar, so University of Iowa football is a big deal in Iowa City and in Iowa in general. And so the children's hospital you can see in the background is right next to the stadium. And the top floor of the hospital is actually a nice communal space where kids in the hospital and their families can hang out and on game days can watch the game. And so the wave is at the end of the first quarter, everyone turns and waves to the kids, and just a really nice tradition. And so, yeah, genetic counseling. You know, I learned a lot about genetic counseling during this project. So what is a genetic counselor? So the short version is that they're experts in genetic testing. You know, it's fairly easy to get a genetic test these days. Your doctor can order one, or you can do 23andMe or whatever. But there's a lot more to it. You know, say you have a history of breast cancer in your family, should you get a genetic test? And so this is where genetic counselors come in. That's what they're trained for. And so they're going to be better equipped to answer questions like that. And then also, once you get your results, you know, how do you interpret them? And not only what the genes are, but what do you do about it? And so, you know, online companies don't really do that. And your PCP, you know, might not know all the best follow-up information. So that's where genetic counselors, that's really what they do. You know, they interpret tests and help you look at your history and see if you should even get tested. And then, you know, figure out follow-up care from there. And so our genetic counseling program has had a lot of success, but there's more demand that they get than they can keep up with, you know, which is a common problem, but a problem nonetheless. And so the director of genetic counseling wanted more resources, and hospital admin said, well, what's your ROI? Fair enough, but actually pretty tricky when it comes to genetic counseling. This is a young specialty, and so CMS doesn't reimburse for genetic counseling. And so there's no direct impact in a positive way. You know, you don't offset your salary directly. Now, so the thought is, one of the things that genetic counselors do is they make referrals. That's one of the big things they do. And they do follow-up care, like they refer you to the right people. So even if they're not bringing in money directly, you know, they're bringing a lot more people into doing MRIs and preventive surgeries and such. And so there's more money coming in other ways. But to quantify that is very hard. You know, for many reasons. You have to identify the population. So for instance, we wanted to look at a specific gene mutation for breast cancer, but that's not in the EMR. So you have to figure out a different way of identifying the population. And it turns out, you know, we figured it out for breast cancer, but then we worked on prenatal and it was totally different. Additionally, you know, referrals are in the EMR, but, you know, it's not perfect and it's optimized for normal uses, but for our purposes, it didn't really work very well. So attribution of what can be related to that genetic counselor is a little tricky sometimes. Yeah, and so there was one study out there by University of Texas Southwestern looking at this problem. And we built our study based on that while adapting and expanding, because that study was via manual chart review. And so they were able to be really specific about what happened because it was all expert review. But they had a much smaller scope. I think they reviewed a couple hundred, whereas we were looking at thousands of records. And we also wanted to make sure that we were considering cost and reimbursement and not just the charges that we were doing. And so after doing all of that, you know, we didn't have professional billing cost data and reimbursement data at the encounter level. You know, we have aggregate, but if we're trying to look at specific encounters, it just doesn't exist in our data warehouse. And so we do have that sort of information for hospital billing. So that's where we focused on the hospital contribution margin, which is called margin. And so basically it's profit, you know, actual reimbursement minus attributed costs. And I say attributed because overhead, like the cost of a hospital, you know, you have to, our whole budgeting team does all of that, and finance and whatnot. And I don't know much about it. And I'm glad they do it. Now, once you've identified the population, and then you have to figure out what's attributable. And then what we did is kind of a retrospective experiment where we compared patients by whether or not they'd seen genetic counseling or not. And so for those patients, you know, is the margin different? Is there a downstream financial benefit to the institution from genetic counseling? And here and throughout, I'm going to talk a lot about finances. And obviously, number one is patient outcomes, you know, and genetic counseling, I don't know, within their field, it seems pretty clear that there is a very positive benefit to patient outcomes. It's just even harder to quantify. And so this was focusing on the finances of it. And so this uses a lot of different sorts of data at all sorts of different granularities and loosely related at best. And so enter relationships. All right, so here's what the data source looks like for the first cohort we looked at, which is that breast cancer susceptibility group. And I will say we're still early in our data governance journey at UIHC, so I had a lot of work cut out for me. I ended up using 5 databases on 3 servers. And so each of these logical tables, you know, these little rectangles here, is either a custom SQL query or a join of multiple custom SQL queries like down here. And honestly, there's a lot of initial SQL going on behind the scenes. And I know that's not all best practices, but you know, that's what needed to be done to wrangle the problem. And so, you know, complicated problem needs disorganized data, and that's a big programming lift. And yeah, so I can't imagine doing this in Tableau prior to relationships. I'm sure it could be done, but that would just be an absurd amount of LODs. Okay, but before we get into cancer, because that's actually more complicated, let's talk about prenatal, which is the other cohort we looked at. So in our EMR, we have episodes, which is basically a group of related encounters. And so we looked at all prenatal episodes as our population. And then we broke it down into 3 subgroups, infertility and IVF, and then pregnancy that delivered at UIHC and those that didn't. So for IVF, you're either going for infertility, which is not genetic counseling, or for genetic issues where you want to test the embryos because you have known genetic mutations in your family. And so, you know, certainly that is genetic counseling. And then pregnancy, you know, it turns out, we'll look at this in a minute, the revenue and margin from a delivery dwarfs anything else. And so we really separated out pregnancies based on whether or not they delivered at UIHC, because again, we're looking financially and we're looking for those big margin differentials. All right. So just quick on episodes, you know, you have a bunch of encounters in the EMR and each encounter has different charges on it, and we can have reimbursement and cost data at the encounter level, but then for prenatal, we're using these episodes to group together the encounters and financial information. So the prenatal data structure is a little simpler. I still wouldn't say it's simple. Not only, this was the second one I did, so it was a little more elegant and also just happened to use less areas in the different databases. But again, 3 servers and 5 databases, lots of custom SQL, initial SQL. So going through the tables a little more closely, we have the first logical table is for prenatal episodes. And this is the population we're looking in, and that is effectively the patient level, but if you have multiple pregnancies, it's going to be multiple episodes for a patient. Then we noodle that to HARS or hospital accounts. And this is where we have our financial information, margin, payer, other stuff. This is a one-to-many noodle, I suppose. And then we also noodle that to charges. And charges isn't part of the main analysis, but we do look at charge type to see what the differences are and, you know, whether there's any relevant differences that would explain the margin differences. We also pulled in retail pharmacy here. We ended up not using it because the cost data didn't work how we thought it did. but it's a relatively small data set and a quick query. And so kind of left it in there for a rainy day because using noodles, it doesn't mess anything up. All right, so we're gonna pop over to Tableau. All right, so I know there's been a lot of background information. It's just, it is what it is. But now some Tableau stuff. So, this is, again, very much an analytic journey. And so we started looking at everything, and, we've got infertility and pregnancy, and then within pregnancy, whether or not you delivered at UIHC. We've got this unknown, because not delivered at UIHC is not a field in the data. And so if you're within 300 days of the beginning of your pregnancy, could go either way. And so we call that unknown. And then we're also breaking down whether or not you saw genetic counseling or GC. So number of episodes, number of patients. We did debate a lot about whether or not to use, or whether to use episodes or patients. It just turned out that within each group, there wasn't really a practical difference. So we used episodes. And then you start looking at margin, and it's like, oh, this is where you need to focus. And actually that margin differential is pretty good too, where SAW GC is considerably higher than those who did not see genetic counseling. And so that's where we started to focus. But just to be thorough, we looked at the other groups and, in a more tabular form. And yeah, the differential actually went the opposite way, where you make slightly less money with genetic counseling downstream. And those differences are small enough where if you get one big hospital account, either in a positive or negative manner, it can really skew that information. Whereas, this difference is pretty substantial and more significant. We saw these numbers shift a little month to month as we added things in, but this difference stayed consistent. So, yeah, digging a little deeper into pregnancies with deliveries, we noticed that those without previous IVF episodes, IVF in vitro fertilization, but they had a bigger margin differential where it's those folks who didn't see IVF already who we're having the biggest impact on. And perhaps this is because IVF does more genetic testing already and they work closer with genetic counseling, but it's kind of after the fact rationalizing. But either way, that was where we wanted to focus. So spoiler alert, the end product of this, I know it's a Tableau talk, but it was in Excel just due to the ease of ad hoc analysis. So I needed to get some numbers to plug into my model. And so here we're looking at monthly numbers of episodes and deliveries based on whether or not you saw genetic counseling in total. So those were some helpful numbers. We also needed to know how many patients an FTE of genetic counseling can see. And so I worked with the team to, get rid of outliers, like the program started here and there was a ramp up, and then, you have maternity leaves and whatnot. But then based on that, you can get a nice average number of new patients per genetic counselor. All right, back to PowerPoint. All right, and so, here are some screenshots of the aforementioned Excel. I won't go through all of this. These are all the parameters I put in, but, you get a pretty solid yearly profit there from adding the FTEs of almost $1 million. And obviously this is expected and who knows what's really going to happen. But with that level, you can be pretty certain that it's going to be a good profit. And ROI of 157% is great. And also interestingly, in addition to the 6.5 FTEs you would get for this, you can pay for another 10 genetic counselors throughout the program. And so I think that's really where this becomes attractive because, hospital admin wants to do the right thing. They just don't want to lose a ton of money in the process. And so if we can, find a population that's going to bring in a lot of margin to the institution and then use that money to do other clinically important things that are less profitable, that's a really appealing thing. And so then, switching back to breast cancer, So whereas with prenatal, we could just look for episodes, there wasn't a similar data structure we could use for breast cancer susceptibility. And after lots of dead ends and exploration, we ended up determining to use whether or not a patient had a diagnosis of Z15.01 in their chart anywhere. And so this is the ICD-10 code for genetic susceptibility to breast cancer. And yeah, again, we wanted to look at a specific gene, but it just wasn't in the data. So we went with this slightly broader definition. And the project team also identified early on that whether or not a patient had cancer altered things significantly. And basically the big benefit of genetic counseling is improved cancer screening for this population, which leads to better outcomes. If you're 30, you're not supposed to get mammograms, but if you have this gene mutation, you should every year, get an MRI. And so that's a big difference, and it's going to lead to a much better outcome, as well as increased services and increased revenue. But if you've already had cancer, you're already at higher risk of getting cancer again, and you're working with oncologists, and they're going to likely recommend the appropriate screenings already. And plus, oncology and genetic counseling work very closely together, so they share a lot of best practices. So again, we broke it down based on whether or not you had cancer or not. And so interestingly, this is what we came to call a lifetime diagnosis. If you have this genetic marker, you have it forever. And so preventative care changes somewhat throughout your life as you age, but there's always additional preventative care based on these markers. So whereas we had nice clean episodes of prenatal, now we've got this open-ended, somewhat vague patient lifetime to work with. And so we still wanted to do kind of a retrospective experiment where we're comparing average margin based on whether or not you've seen genetic counseling. But what does an average mean in this context? If you just take a straight average by patient, you'd be unfairly comparing patients with 5 years of data to those who just got diagnosed last month. And then you can't just take an average per encounter, because part of the hypothesis is that if you've seen genetic counseling, you're going to come in more often than those who haven't. So, I was going to count patient years in the data, but someone might have this diagnosis and not come in for years, whereas they might have come in multiple times in a year if they'd seen genetic counseling. And so again, we want to compare like to like. And so then what I ended up coming up with was patient years. And so basically, you figure out a start date and an end date, and you take the date diff. Seems pretty simple, but a lot of work went into getting to that point. And so your start date is based on your first Z15 diagnosis, but also, the time window we're looking at, an end date. I mean, basically, not to be callous, but it's date of death. At least for the main cohort. And so you take this date diff and you divide by 365.25 because you want your date diff in days to get a more accurate number, get those decimal years. And then basically you can just sum the margin and sum the patient years, and you can get a nice average yearly margin by patient, and this scales really nicely for entire cohorts. So to make things a little more complicated, because it wasn't complicated enough, we have to account for patients transitioning between groups. So, say you have a diagnosis of Z15 and you've never seen genetic counseling and you've never had cancer, and that you'd be in, this group. And then 2 years later, you see someone from genetic counseling, and that shifts you over to this group. Now, those first 2 years still apply to this group, but then, you're in this group now. And then maybe, unfortunately, a year later, you get cancer, and now you're in the genetic counseling cancer group. And so again, your first 2 years are still in no genetic counseling, no cancer. Then the third year is over here in genetic counseling, no cancer. But then anything moving forward, both in terms of patient years and attributable margin, goes to the genetic counseling cancer group. So with that in mind, let's kind of dig a little deeper into this data structure again. So again, we've got a patient level table that is our everything relates to. And so a couple of these, again, were for initial analysis and getting some parameters that weren't really part of the main analysis. All genetic counseling visits, we were interested in seeing, what other specialties people were seeing, et cetera. And again, charge and forward. using for looking at whether there's differences in the charge mix, but mainly you're using this patient and HAR information. I tried to use the scaffold technique, and it was actually a pretty cool technique. I didn't end up using it, but I've used it in other workbooks since then. But, you know, before relationships, if you wanted to scaffold something out, you know, meaning you're densifying your data with more rows, you would have to densify the whole data. But now you can kind of do this flexible scaffold where what I was doing is saying, if your start date and end date were multiple years apart, you basically blow it up so you get a row per year, which was super neat because then you don't have to blow up your whole data set. You can just expand it and contract it as needed. Again, didn't use that here eventually, but it's a great technique I've used a lot. And then specialty mapping, again, that was some pre-analysis. So Kaplan-Meier, I had never heard of this, but it ended up being super useful. So one more complication before we can get to an ROI. I started plugging numbers in and building in my Excel model and realized I needed a way to characterize how long patients stayed in a group. Because again, we don't have an episode. You just have a group and a patient years, but if we're building up a model, we needed an expected length of time that you're in each group. So normally what would you do? You look at people and you see how long they stay in a group, and then you take the average or median or what have you. But the issue is that we didn't have enough data. So we only, you know, due to EMR conversions and data warehouse migrations and who knows what, you know, we only had data that I trusted going back to 2015. And I wanted a healthy lead up period to identify new patients versus existing. So I ended up using July 2017 for a start date. We used to have our fiscal year based on July. And so that gives us about 4 years of data, but initial analysis showed that the average time in a group was 3 to 5 years. So how do you account for inadvertently excluding those longer times? And so my colleague turned me on to Kaplan-Meier survival curves, which as a bonus are very often used in the cancer literature. So it was kind of fitting that it's for this topic. And basically it lets you determine survival rates. And survival can mean anything. In this sense, I'm taking survival, meaning you're staying in a group. And you can look at this even if a lot of your data doesn't have end dates. You know, and if you're picking, the way this works is if you have people joining your study throughout, and then your study ends and people just joined, you know, you can still use that data. And basically, yeah, you can consider, another way to think about it is if you think of every day that you're in a group as a trial, you know, it's roughly geometric. You know, whether or not you left the previous day doesn't affect whether or not you leave today. And so it's kind of memoryless and a lot of big hand waving. But, you know, that geometric intuition then lines up with how roughly with how this line plotted out. And, you know, it would be great to have more data, but we have what we have. And so, yeah, that's what I ended up using to calculate these expected times by saying, okay, well, we have a geometric distribution and we know, you know, the probability that any patient will leave the group on any given day. And I'm not going to get into the math there because it's a little beyond the scope of this talk. So using all of this, we are able to put together an ROI. And so I've been talking about the non-cancer group, but again, using prenatal, we said, okay, well, what if we also funded a cancer FTE and put that in our analysis? Now, the interesting thing is your first year, you lose money. And so again, as this is a lifetime diagnosis, you're building up this stable of patients sort of, you know, and so every year you get a bigger group and people leave and eventually it kind of stabilizes. But that first year you have a small group and the margin differential is a lot tighter than it is for prenatal, where it's a really big difference. And so you start to make money in year 2. And yeah, I mean, it keeps going up, but probably at about the rate of inflation. But yeah, I mean, you can again, admin wants to not lose a lot of money. And so we're showing we can do this profitable group and fund an additional group that's not as profitable. And still, that's only going to require 0.3 of an FTE, and you're paying for more than 1 FTE already. And so that's pretty solid. Yeah, and you can do the clinically right thing and motivate it with finances. So again, being Tableau, throw this in Tableau. And side note, I just copied this table, did copy and paste into Tableau. Not a new technique, but if you're not familiar, it's a great ad hoc way to make a quick table or a quick graph. And so you can see that cumulative profit definitely keeps going up. It's not the same as, hip and knee surgery, but it's pretty good. All right, so, again, conclusion, using analytics and Tableau, this was really tricky data, a lot of really messy relationships in the data. And, we were able to use Tableau to explore it and figure out the numbers that we needed. And yeah, I love relationships. So I just like to take a moment to acknowledge my team. This was definitely a team effort. I really loved working with this genetic counseling team, very engaged in the process. And then certainly some of my colleagues in business intelligence all helped. So yeah, that's my talk. And yeah, feel free to reach out. I know this is kind of new content area for analytics. And yeah, it was a really interesting project to work with. All right, back to our hosts.
Thank you, Jeff. This was one, I really appreciated you showed how much you had to get in the weeds without necessarily getting there yet. I think many people on the call have either had similar projects or projects that can definitely resonate with having to get in the weeds. And it was really cool to see both a real world application of how relationships helped with that analysis. And I think even tying back there's the clinically right thing to do, but then how do you make it happen financially? And I think it's something that a lot of us have to deal with. So really, really cool topic and really appreciated the presentation. I know there may have been a couple questions that came in. We do have a little bit of time. And I'm kind of looking at Nicole and Lindsey because I hadn't looked in a couple seconds.
Well, there was a Q&A that I was interested in because Tom asked, Jeff, how'd you gain all this knowledge about genetic counseling and being like a BI architect? Is just being in the space for so long? Did you have to really do some research? I think it's an interesting just question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that's kind of what I do. I have some, I don't know. I have some colleagues who have a specific appointment to a group. I do not. And so every project I work is with a new area of the hospital. And so a big part of that initial process is working with the subject matter experts. And, I mentioned having an engaged group, and we had I started working on this a year ago, and it's kind of tailed off, but it was a lot of work. And we had, for a long time, weekly meetings with myself, the director of genetic counseling, and 2 genetic counselors, one from prenatal, one from cancer. And so we're like, hey, I just noticed this thing in the data. What's that all about? And then they'd be like, oh, well, let me tell you. And it was just really, I don't know, I love that aspect of it. But yeah, and I certainly did some online research, but a lot of it was leaning on those experts.
Actually having those conversations. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I think it's fantastic that you've demonstrated how you can use Tableau to analyze information, and it's not just for creating a dashboard for an end user. And to be able to pair that up with, financial information and profit margin, that's a really difficult task to do. I know we've hired consultants to do that in the past for us. So hats off to you. That's amazing.
Thanks. And, it definitely helps that, there's a whole team in finance that just does margin, and so and that was in the data warehouse, and that's why I had my 3rd server, but it was there and I could connect to it, otherwise, yeah, there was already so many complications. But yeah, so it was definitely a big team that ended up working on it, whether or not they knew they were helping.
There are two more questions in there. Someone was asking, was that clarity out of the box, or did you create the logic to build it?
Sure. Yeah, so it was, yeah, I created the logic. So for better or for worse, we have a very custom build in Epic. And so, you know, used some clarity, used some caboodle, used a lot of our homegrown data warehouse. Yeah. But yeah, we're working on our data governance, and so those tables might be formalized at some point, but they, you know, what I was doing was new.
Was there an end product to an end user where you had to be concerned about the security of the data?
Not yet.
Okay.
So far, the end product has been PowerPoint decks, basically, that the director of genetic counseling is presenting to various senior leaders to justify the FTEs. But yeah, I mean, if they get those FTEs, we're going to need a product on Tableau server where you can actually see, did we do what we said we were going to do? And so, yeah, I think security is an everyday conversation in my group with Tableau server. And so we'll just have to be mindful of who gets access to it.
I think that's all the questions that were related to yours.
Cool.
There are a couple, I know, Sean, you've been also checking away at it, but what we can do, I don't know if there's any last ones on your end, Sean. Jeff, I think you're in the clear, but really do appreciate it. I know you had shared your information at the end of the deck. So if folks have follow-up questions, I would definitely recommend reaching out that way. But we do have a couple minutes, Sean, if there's any last questions you wanted to hit on to put you back on the spot.
No, that's cool. Let's see. Yeah, so the question is connecting to live data in the field. So we do still have a little bit of data latency. And because we have to crawl the data, into the into our warehouse out of Millennium, there is a little bit of data latency. So it's not a true live connection, but it's as live as we can make it. So so that's one aspect of that. So, but again, we're not yet to the point where we're trying to do near real-time reporting. Everything that we're trying to do is, you know, everything that happened yesterday and on in the past. So we're able to get down to that level, which is pretty good. So, and then there was a question about a Cerner internal user group. Yes, we are thinking about that and working on that to kind of help, you know, bring this knowledge to our client base. So we'll be doing that. And then, yeah, the last one is, there's another comment about, you know, just about the documentation that we've been doing. It's quite a bit. So I've learned Confluence Markdown quite well over the last 6 to 8 months. So if you guys use, if anybody uses Confluence out there, we've become quite excelled at it. So, but yeah, so.
I think many of you have seen that we posted a couple of times in the chat that we're looking for speakers, and the speakers can be on anything that's related, that's healthcare related or public health related, any level of expertise from beginner to advanced. Just, you know, shoot your idea and fill out that form. We try to meet at least bi-monthly. Is that right? Bi-monthly? Yeah.
Depending on how we're managing and if we have enough speakers lined up. But we are looking for those speakers. And then the other thing too is if you have feedback, suggestions for future meetings, even if you necessarily don't want to present, but if you have topics in mind, anything like that, please feel free to reach out to any of the co-leads, myself, Nicole, Lindsey, or Simon, who is already getting to enjoy his weekend being in the UK. So
we're all a bit jealous.
And as a reminder, it's a global virtual event that we have. So obviously anyone can come, and so we can have speakers from anywhere. We do tend to have it, we fit into at least the Eastern time zone at some place, since at least the three of us are in the US. But we're trying to be a little more flexible with time zones around the world too. So wherever you are, come talk.
Yeah.
Yep. And the video will be available. It's on the Tableau YouTube channel. And if you just click under videos, you will see all of their videos for all their user groups, including ours.
And I think it's usually, I would say like by the end of next week, if not sooner, but usually within a week, the video will be up.
All right.
Awesome. Well, I really do appreciate everyone taking the time. I know it's been a busy start to the year for many, particularly in the healthcare space. So I hope everyone has a good rest of your day and a good weekend ahead.
Yeah, have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye.
Everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye.